Well, the Pentagon has announced that they are, well, I guess in their words, they're going to have they're issuing a stand-down order for 60 days to root out white supremacy and white nationalism, which apparently there's a very rampant problem of white nationalism in the military. If it's happened once, it's happened 1,000 times. You're walking down the street, past the military base in your town or the National Guard armory, and you see a guy in camo with a shaved head and a swastika tattoo on his neck, and you think, oh, gee, there we go, another U.S. military Nazi. Although as common as that is, and as rampant of a problem as we know that is, I have to say, me personally, that's never happened. In fact, I've never even considered the idea of there being a white nationalism problem in the U.S. military. But of course, the reason for that is obvious. There isn't an actual white nationalism problem. There's a air quotes white nationalism problem, because I think everyone's caught on to the fact that the word racist has been out of vogue for a long time now, because they completely shredded that term. It has no meaning anymore, and people accept that. You call somebody a racist, nobody cares. And so I guess they're onto the white nationalist thing, because probably Nazi they think might be too strong of a word to call people who are guilty of wrongthink in the military Nazis, considering that the U.S. military defeated the Nazis and they're kind of very proud of that. So you might insult a lot of folks in the military if you called them Nazis. So calling them white nationalists, even though white nationalists typically are like Nazis, I guess that's a little less offensive. So this is an outgrowth of what we saw around the time of the inauguration, when you had all those National Guardsmen who were being relieved of their duties because they were considered to be their loyalty was called into question. Which I would have to think, if you are a member of the military, that's got to be pretty insulting, that you would be removed from a mission because they think that you're not loyal enough, that somehow your oath is essentially meaningless. Although the Pentagon seems to be indicating that, I think this was John Kirby who might have said this, that it's also a problem if members of the military take their oath a little too seriously, because the Oath Keepers are considered to be one of these problematic groups that are supposed to be rooted out. But in the case of the inauguration, there were National Guardsmen who were being relieved of their duties supposedly because they had Gadsden flags, or because they were members of the NRA. Which that just it sounds cartoonish, but is it really that cartoonish when you have the Pentagon saying that there's a big problem of white nationalism in the ranks? So to cut through all of the rhetorical nonsense here, what's going on is that there is a purge of, I guess, political enemies within the military, which is something that we see it's something that you see in very weak states, places where there's recently been a coup or a coup attempt. They will try and purge the military to make sure that there are only folks in that military who support the current regime. So, for example, after the fall of Iraq in 2003 or 4, I guess it was 3, because it didn't last a full year, to actually defeat the government. They dissolved the Iraqi army, purged all of them to make sure that there were no Baathists within the ranks. They didn't want any Baathists in the Iraqi military. They wanted to make sure that the only people in the Iraqi military were folks who were loyal to the new regime, the new, American puppet regime. And there's plenty of other examples of this throughout history. When you are taking over the state, or if you are, a state that's currently in power, but you feel your power faltering and you feel like there might be dissent from within the ranks, you got to purge them. And so this is not a sign, just like so many things we've been seeing over the last couple of years, this is not a sign of an American establishment that feels comfortable and empowered. This is a sign of an American establishment in retreat that is desperately holding on for dear life to their power. These are people who are running scared, who not only feel the need to smear their political opponents as white nationalist neo-Nazis, but they feel the need to go after their own military, the military that's supposed to serve them and follow their orders. And considering that, historically, the military has tended to lean right of center, um, I don't know how they're going to accomplish this without, purging a lot of people. Because, I mean, your military guys, a lot of them are pretty outspoken about their politics. And I feel like the establishment runs the risk of sort of kicking over a hornet's nest if they really try and get rid of all of the folks in the military who have sort of libertarian leanings or Trump-supporting leanings. And again, I say libertarian because you do get kind of a lot of, you get a lot of guys who come out of the military who really buy into the whole, I defended our constitutional rights kind of thing, and that's how you end up with people like the Oath Keepers, people who take that very seriously. But then you also end up with a lot of people who go in there just as normal Republican guys who lionize the military, and and were taught growing up that's a respectable thing, and they come out normal Republican guys. The broad net of supposed white nationalism is going to catch up. I mean, I could think even a majority of your infantrymen, because I mean, think of the demographic. I mean, they're young guys. Young guys tend to skew right-wing overall. Men in general do. You've seen those maps where they say, like, oh, look at this electoral map. If only men voted, and it's like, Republican wins every time, 49 states. And so, you run the risk if you do this of, maybe what they do is they take out a couple of guys who are particularly outspoken, and you make an example of them. And you dishonorably discharge them, and you make it clear to everybody that, hey, if you speak out of line, if you say the wrong things on Facebook, if you, have a Gadsden flag, or let alone a Confederate flag, which used to be very common amongst Southern guys in the military. I mean, the Confederate flag was never controversial before. But now the Gadsden flag, the 13-star American flag, these are all seen as symbols of extremism. And so maybe if the military starts by just purging a couple of guys on the fringes to make an example out of them, they'll be able to get the rest of them to sort of get in line with neoliberal orthodoxy. Because I think what they're trying to do here is avoid the mistake of the Spanish Republic. The Spanish Republic attempted to institute a bunch of very progressive policies in the 1930s, and then you had a very conservative military who did not like that, and they say, yeah, we swore an oath to, do as you guys say, but we don't like what you're doing. You are destroying our country, and we're going to stop you. And so you got Franco, because Franco, along with a bunch of other generals, rose up and said, we're not going to take this anymore. We're going to take you out. But I've said in the past that I didn't think that there was much of a risk of that here in the U.S. because the generals, the officer corps of the U.S. military, is very much in favor of the establishment. They're part of the establishment. They have, they're not wild-eyed ideologues who, buy into their own BS. The Joint Chiefs of Staff, they don't give a damn about your constitutional rights. They look at the rest of us as ants, as peons, just like the rest of the folks in Washington. Think about what their job is. There's nothing honorable about being a general in the U.S. military. What do? You order idealistic young people who you tell are, who you convince them to join the ranks at age 18 by saying, hey, you're going to go defend our civil rights and our civil liberties, and you're going to fight bad guys and protect the American people. And then what do? You send them over there to murder civilians. And you order them to bomb weddings. You're not a good guy. You know exactly what you're doing. None of the generals can be claimed to be tricked into what they're doing. And of course, now you have this Secretary of Defense, who was a general until 5 minutes ago, Lloyd Austin, who's the one carrying out this purge. Now, what's this going to mean in the long run? In the long run, I don't think it means very much. I think that this is a symptom of overarching problems. It is not sort of a problem in and of itself. And problem. I even question using the term problem. I guess just phenomenon would be more of a neutral term. Because again, as I said, this is a sign of weakness. When you have a volunteer army, you should not worry about sort of fearing a mutiny from the lower ranks. You should not worry about them being disloyal to you, because these are guys who signed up because they want to be there. So if you're having trouble and you have to sort of purge your military when you have an all-volunteer military, when it's not guys who are draftees who are being forced to be there, you've got a big problem with your government. And that, to me, of course, is a positive. It's a good thing that the U.S. government is fearful. They're worried about the impending collapse of the United States, and they feel like there are enemies all around them. But either way, I don't think that this will be effective, this purge. Either they purge too few people, and all of the dissenters are still within the ranks. They only get rid of a couple of people here and there. Or they purge, a decent percentage of the military, and they create a backlash. Now, I guess the alternative thing is that they'll try and, re-educate these guys in the military, not just kick them out. They'll, make them go through, some critical race theory training, which I think people in the military probably already do. I was talking to a veteran not too long ago who was telling me about some transgender sensitivity training that he was forced to sit through, and I guess he caught his whatever officer was giving the course off guard when he said, hey, my dad wears a dress, can I skip this? Not sure if that's actually true, but it's kind of a funny story. Oh, and I think this goes without saying, but I guess I'll point out the irony of the U.S. military being worried about white nationalism or white supremacy or something, when it's hard for me to think of an institution that is responsible for the deaths of more non-white people than the U.S. military. I mean, if you want to talk about being against non-white folks, the U.S. military is in a class of its own. Now, I guess I'll finish up this little talk on explaining sort of why things like this don't really concern me and what I think is coming. I've said this before, but again, for new subscribers, I guess I should point this out once in a while. What we're heading towards in this country is a financial apocalypse, pretty much. Where our stock market is at like 200% to GDP, totally abnormal. Assets all across the economy are way overinflated. There is, of course, the massive debt bubble in both private debt, people having, these massive mortgages and all this massive credit card debt. They owe way more money on their houses than their houses will be worth at some point once the bubble collapses. You have, we're getting close probably to $30 trillion in debt for the federal government. All of these economic features that I've pointed out, all of these economic facts, they're unsustainable. And so it's a matter of when we have our next, big recession, which will turn into a major depression, the biggest depression since the 1930s, easily. It's just a matter of when, how long they can kick the can down the road. I've been chronicling that since I started this channel. The Fed and the federal government's, efforts to kick that can down the road. By the time we get there, to when the bubble pops, it's not going to matter how loyal the U.S. military is to the federal government, because the federal government is going to collapse. There was a lot of dissent within the ranks in the Soviet Union, too, towards the end, but it ultimately didn't end up mattering, because the Soviet economy, the whole Soviet system, collapsed. Yes, when you had Gorbachev trying to moderate things a little bit towards the end there, you had some communist hardliners in the military who tried to stage a coup to arrest that moderation to arrest the socialization of the Soviet Union, but he couldn't. It's not, these things were happening on their own. When when the bubble collapses, the U.S. military is not going to be able to hold the United States together as a political institution. And so all of this sort of fear, I guess, that you're starting to see of people, the leadership of the military worrying about the rank and file being out of step with them politically, this is just this is sort of a forewarning of what's to come. It is a sign that the system is already coming apart. But once we reach that final stage of collapse, this is a symptom. As I said, this is a symptom. This is not a problem in and of itself. It is a fact that when the federal government is no longer solvent, or unable to pay its bills and unable to exercise its authority in any meaningful way, that the 50 states are going to be left to their own devices. It's not like they're going to be granted independence or something in the way the British colonies were, although, the British colonies were, but the reason why they did that even was because the British Empire was collapsing. The British government could not maintain its overseas empire. And, again, we're seeing the same phenomenon here in the United States. We are in we're in the late stages of the American empire. These are the last gasps of a dying power. So try and keep the whole big picture in perspective when you're looking at these individual news stories. If you don't understand why the collapse is coming, maybe you should study some of these things a little bit. Study the current state of our economy. Study the history of Fed economic bubbles since at least the 1980s. Look at a chart of interest rates over the last 40 years. It's been straight down, and that's been the only way that we've been inflating our economy more and more and more. These are not things that I can spell out for you in 5 minutes. If there's people interested in me doing a video exclusively on that, maybe I could lay things out a little better. But this is the direction that we're heading, and a lot of what I discuss on here are stories that are a subset of this overall story. So with that said, if you get anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.